Today, we will talk about a truly unknown civilization. Historians carefully bypass the history and culture of this world, composing unpretentious tales. And from historical monographs, we will be able to learn almost nothing about what kind of people they were, what kind of social system they had, where they came from, and where they suddenly disappeared to. The only thing that is known for sure: these people were outwardly different from us. And today, we are not going to talk about giants, which everyone has heard about, but whose remains either do not exist, or are hidden in museum storerooms so far away that even museum managers do not know about them. Today, we are going to talk about long-headed people, or as scientists call people with artificially deformed skulls. The first artificially deformed skulls were described in Peru at the beginning of the 19th century. European scientists then believed that this phenomenon was one of the wonders of the New World. But in 1820, an elongated skull was found in Austria. The find was owned by Count Breiner, who provided information about the skull, sketches and so on, to various museums in Europe, called the Aver skull, because it was found in the ruins of the Aver fortification. Strange, of course, statements were made by scientists at the beginning of the 19th century. After all, even today, no one knows exactly to which ethnic and linguistic group the Avars belonged: Mongol-speaking, Turkic-speaking, or Iranian-speaking. But knowing nothing about the Avars, the first elongated skull found in Europe was initially attributed to the Avars. Then the Swedish anthropologist Adolf Riccius made the first anatomical study of this skull, after which it was decided that it was a Peruvian skull that accidentally fell into Austria. But soon, a similar skull was found in a quarry in Vienna in 1846 year, and was also called Avar. Then, other elongated skulls were found in other areas of Western Europe. They have already been arbitrarily declared Saracen, Francoist, Helvetic, Celtic, Gothic, Tatar. In the first half of the 19th century, elongated skulls were found in Russia, but they practically remained unknown to scientists in Western Europe. Only in 1860, Branch published his study of 3 deformed skulls from Kirk, which were also attributed to the Avars. It is not known exactly when the skulls were found, but in 1826 year, they began to attract the curious to the Kirk Archaeological Museum. An amateur archaeologist, the head of the Kirk Customs, a Frenchman de Brux. It was a wonderful time. The head of customs is a Frenchman. So this Frenchman believed that these skulls belonged to the Sarmatian tribe of Macromullet, that is, big-headed. He was pushed to this conclusion by the works of Hippocrates. In 1832 year, the French researcher Dubois suggested that the Kirk skulls were Cimmerian. One can draw a simple and disappointing conclusion: the historians of the 19th century differed little from modern ones. To explain the origin of the incomprehensible artifact, it was simply attributed to the period of management of an incomprehensible, but most likely fictional civilization, Cimmerians or Avars. In 1867 year, 2 more deformed skulls were found at the mouth of the Don River. In 1880 skulls were found on the banks of the Volga near the city of Samara. For now, let's stop with the findings of skulls and see what the main version is put forward by scientists around the world about the origin of elongated skulls. The versions of scientists on the one hand are convincing. Here's what they write: artificial deformation of the skull is a purposeful method of prolonged external mechanical impact on the head of a growing child. It was used so that the head grew in the right direction and according to natural development. For this purpose, a pressure bandage was applied to the baby's head, which provided a tower-like development of the skull. Artificial deformation of the skull, scientists write, is a very ancient ritual associated with religious beliefs, considered a sign of aristocracy, a sign of a representative of the community in which it was practiced. From an anatomical point of view, artificial deformation reduces the cranial diameter, increasing the height of the skull. But with the change in the shape of the head, the volume of the skull is not lost. In people with deformed skulls, brain function disorders do not occur. Just a wonderful version of historians. And how exactly do they notice everything? Have they found an incomprehensible stone structure? The observatory. Did you find an elongated skull? There is, without any doubt, an artificial deformation to resemble an aristocrat. But only they did not describe any people on Earth where all the aristocrats had elongated skulls. Rather, they say that it is possible that in Egypt the pharaoh also pulled out skulls. Let's agree with historians and believe that the inhabitants of Kirk and Austria somewhere on papyrus accidentally saw an image of an Egyptian pharaoh with a long skull, and they liked it so much that they immediately threw them to their children and began to put tight bandages on their skulls. Let the kids be a little hurt, but when they grow up, they will be the spitting image of pharaohs. The medical side of this issue also makes you think. So-called scientists write that artificial deformation of the skull reduces the cranial diameter, increasing the height of the skull. In people with a deformed skull shape, there are no violations of brain functions because its integrity is not violated with a change in shape. Just a genius wrote, but this genius seems to know nothing at all about the physiology of the human body. Man, of course, is a very durable and well-designed being, but almost all experiments on moving human organs from place to place, changing their shape, as well as removing seemingly unnecessary human organs, usually lead to negative consequences. How can it be stated without clinical studies and experiments on thousands of volunteers that changing the shape of the human brain does not lead to any deterioration of brain activity? The human brain is the least studied area of the human body, and science even today cannot explain how it works. What happens if you artificially change its shape? No one knows the consequences of such an intervention. Yes, that there is a brain. Let's take such a seemingly simple thing from a physiological point of view as ribs. A person seems to have a lot of them, and if you remove a couple, then nothing terrible will happen. So this handsome Liv Ken, Rodrigo Alves thought the same. To reduce the waist circumference, in order to be more elegant, he paid the doctors $40,000 and had 2 ribs removed. It seems that nothing terrible happened, just a man had 2 unnecessary, as it seemed to him, ribs removed, and he very soon regretted it. I'm in pain every night. They can be tolerated, but I don't understand what I was thinking then. I now have 2 scars on my back, but the worst thing is that I don't feel my size decrease. The man's brain was not pulled out, the 3rd kidney was not sewn on, just 2 supporting ribs were removed. From a physiological point of view, all internal organs have not suffered any changes, but in fact, a person can no longer lead a normal lifestyle without medication. And our scientists have it simple. Let's give babies a brain pull. Nothing terrible will happen, because the volume of the brain will not change. So the version with an artificial deformation of the skull does not stand up to any criticism. American researcher Brian Foster conducted his own studies of elongated skulls. He agreed with the management of the Historical Museum in Paracas and took tissue samples of 5 skulls. The kits contained fragments of hair, teeth, pieces of skull bones, and parts of the skin. In order to avoid biased judgments, the geneticist who conducted the analysis was not told about the origin of the material. And this is the conclusion of geneticists he received: some DNA fragments do not match any known human template. So if you believe this genetic examination, then longheads are a special category. Brian Foster also drew attention to the fact that the brain volume and the weight of the skull, established during the study, significantly exceeds the human figure, and this could not be the result of a simple deformation. But the most amazing thing is that some long skulls have only 1 parietal bone. An ordinary person has 2 such bones. All this points to some unknown race of people who quite recently lived next to us. Scientists are always talking about artificial deformation of the skull, that it was allegedly done after the birth of a person. But, in one of my videos about Flair, I showed a drawing of a mummy of a human embryo with an already elongated skull, and it was found in South America. All this speaks of a special race of long-headed people, which no one studies, does not try to figure out where it came from. Now let's see how common elongated skulls are. The largest number of elongated skulls were found in South America, in the territories attributed to the mythical Incas. There are also many such skulls found in Kabardino-Balkaria. One of the latest finds is a skull found near the village of Kendalin, where the river washed away the shore and exposed the remains of a man with such a skull. Also, in the village of Nidaiskoy, while digging a hole in the garden, a human skeleton was found sitting in a pose resembling that of a pharaoh, whose skull length is almost twice as long as usual. Interestingly, back in 1886 year, the Balkarian Tabi Noruz Uraspiv made a report at the 28th meeting of the Society for Natural Science of Russia about 4 deformed skulls found near Elbrus. Also in Kabardino-Balkaria, near the village of Zayukovo, the staff of the State Historical Museum opened a burial in which there was a skeleton of a man with an elongated tail. In the south of Hungary, an ancient cemetery was recently found with the remains of 96 people, and many had elongated skulls. On the 18th of June, 2000 of the 15th year, scientists working in the Archeum Archaeological Reserve discovered a burial with a skeleton, the skull of which was unusually strongly elongated. On the island of Malta, the remains of people with unusual sizes and shapes of skulls were found in the underground sanctuary of Chaos Flini. These skulls could be viewed at the Archaeological Museum of the Jack, but a few years ago, they were excluded from the exhibition and placed in the museum's storage. Since that time, they have not been put on public display. Only photographs taken by Maltese researcher Dr. Anton Mifsud indicate the existence of skulls and confirm their unusual shape. The famous Egyptologist, Professor Walter Emery, excavated in the Sahara in the 1930s and found many remains with elongated skulls. In France, during the construction of an industrial center, an elongated skull belonging to a rich woman was also discovered. This is evidenced by the gold pins found nearby, a silver mirror, beads made of glass and amber, a comb made of deer horn, a set of tweezers and an ear hook. Now we can try to imagine what kind of an unknown race of people it was, differing from us in a large amount of brain and DNA. Historians say that these are ordinary people who had their skulls artificially deformed to imitate some important and influential people. But historians have put forward a version, and forgot as usual, to clarify. Skulls all over the world were stretched to imitate which people and which well-known aristocrat. How did the residents of Kabardino-Balkaria know that in South America people have elongated skulls? In order for people all over the world to imitate something, there had to be a global civilization with a single language and a very good postal service. But according to the official history, all countries were separated. South America has not yet been opened at all. And historians say only one thing: the skulls were artificially deformed to imitate some long-headed nobility. Only here, they do not explain what kind of leaders they are on a planetary scale, which they definitely should have been like. Thousands of elongated skulls are found in all corners of the world, and it looks very much like these skulls are not from some other millennium. These strange people lived quite recently. Look at the 18th century Queen Marie Antoinette. What wonderful high hairstyles she has, what a long face in her youth. Very similar to a person with a very elongated skull. Probably, an amazing long skull was preserved in her grave, and comparative studies could be carried out. But unfortunately, this will not work. Marie Antoinette was executed by guillotine during the Reign of Terror, when 17,000 people were killed. What a convenient thing the guillotine is after all. To destroy the evidence, it is not necessary to destroy the whole body. It is enough to chop off the wrong head. But not only Marie Antoinette wore high hairstyles. It was a mass phenomenon among the nobility. And not only the nobility, even Russian peasants wore high, awkward headdresses. In the 18th century, there were still ruling aristocrats of another race with power and influence. And so ordinary people tried to be like them in everything. They wore high hairstyles and hats. But in the 19th century, this influential race disappeared somewhere, and a new round of development began. That's it, watch my channel.